this one, right, that is this aeroplane waiting for delivery in the Brabazon hangar, you know, the big hangars on the other side of the airfield. There it is, waiting for delivery to New Zealand. A new aircraft being delivered, they usually do 2 or 3 flights to check it all out. And it's silver, you notice in here. They didn't put any paint on it. And that's another one for New Zealand as well. We can't quite read them. Well, it looks like it's difficult to read the number on that, but we can read it on this one. So that is this aeroplane here. And there is a picture of it later on in New Zealand. It's not a very good picture, but it says Royal New Zealand Air Force in big letters down this blue stripe, and that's how they used to paint it, until they were asked to go and get involved in the Vietnam War. One of the problems in Vietnam War that the Americans had was feeding their soldiers, because they're actually out in jungles. You can't sort of stop at a local cafe and delivering food was bloody difficult, so they brought all their food in from the States in C5s. Do you know what a C5 is? That is the biggest aeroplane flying in the world today, an American. That will take, I think it was 6 double-decker buses they got inside one of them. It would take probably 2 of these fuselages inside and have a lot of space left. The C5 is capable of carrying about 120 tons of food, but at the cost of reducing the length of the flight. So they were doing flights, as I understand it, and I can't confirm this, but my understanding is they brought all the food for Vietnam across from America. They would stop off in Hawaii to refuel, and they would stop off on another one to refuel, because they were carrying something like 120 tons of fuel, of food, sorry, not fuel. And that, of course, is at the expense of fuel. You can have one or the other, but you can't have both. So that's how they kept the soldiers fed. But the problem then was the C5, what they did not want was one to be shot down over Vietnam. So they would take the food to Singapore, possibly also into the Philippines. We don't know the story exactly, but we know they went into Singapore. And the food was then put into small aeroplanes to be shipped out into different places in Vietnam. And the aircraft they were using was an American freighter, twin-engine one, about the same size as this aeroplane, but that had the back of the fuselage hinged open so you could drive and push loads in. They also had engines that were a bloody nuisance, basically. They kept having engine problems with them. So they got in touch with the Royal New Zealand Air Force and they said, can we borrow some of your freighters? Hence, Royal New Zealand Air Force down the bottom, but this is the Vietnam camouflage on the aeroplane. And so they hired them on a complete, you do everything for us. We just stuff the food on your aeroplane and you take it somewhere. So they would be bringing food in, and fortunately none of them were shot down. And at home I've got a couple of photographs that I found of 6 of these flying over the airport in Singapore, and you can just about make out 5911, which is our aeroplane. And so this is the Vietnam camouflage. It's 3 colours. I think it's 1 green and 2 browns, but I'm not sure. It may be 2 greens and 1 brown, but it's 3 anyway. So it's different from the RAF. And so that is how it came to us. What surprises me personally, having had to repaint the windows in my house because I live not too far from the sea, and the Sea Air Rex windows that are painted. In fact, I've now got metal ones that don't do that, but every 2 years you had to repaint them. This thing has got 60 to 70-year-old paint on it, and it is all there, including on the top. The Bolingbroke came with all the top paint removed, and I think the rain had just got it all off somehow or other, but the sides were all right. But this has still got all its camouflage. I know I've been on the top of the aeroplane and it's all complete. It's just faded, but it's still there. And more than once I thought, what sort of paint is this? It'd be lovely to put on my house once in a whole lifetime. So anyway, so let's go and have a look inside. So this was a result of a document that went from the government in October 1943 They sent a thing to Bristol, and only to Bristol. There was no interest because they thought all the other aircraft factories were so blotted out with fighters and bombers that Bristol could make. They said, we need an aeroplane that we can drive vehicles onto. The US Air Force have them, the German Air Force has them, the Russians have even got something they say they can put a car on, but we have got nothing. We can't even take a Jeep. I've actually seen a wartime film of a Jeep being loaded into a DC-3. It took about 12 men and God knows how long to get it in there. So they wanted something that could take vehicles in. And so Bristol were given in October 43, they were said, get on with it, start now. No messing about, no. And so they did a very quick design on this. It's a very simple airplane. It's not pressurized because it was not meant for flying high at all. And the first one was ready for flight just 2 months after the end of the war. It was pretty quick actually to do that, because in 2 years they designed it and built it. So that was quite impressive really. And at that point the government came back and said, oh, we don't want them anymore. You know, you can go home now, we're not interested. Bristol thought, well, now we've got this thing flying, and we had the second one just about to fly, they thought, well, maybe we can sell them. And they sold just over 200 of them. I can't remember the exact number, about 212 of these were sold. They did the Super Freighter for a small number of them, but that was only a very small number. They sold most of these to air forces around the world, but a lot of airlines also bought them, as did Silver City Airways, and you've seen the pictures outside, because they could take cars and holiday people on holiday with their cars. And there were also lots of small companies used them, and in fact a lot of freighters finished up in New Zealand, because New Zealand being two islands and being a very north island and a very south island, what you can grow in New Zealand is totally different from the south to the north. So they had to ship food backwards and forwards all the time. You know, you can grow oranges in the North Island, not in the South Island, not a hope in hell, because it's too near to the Antarctic. And so that resulted, and it's something of the order of 50 odd miles, I'm not sure, it's quite a bit bigger than the cross-channel trip anyway. So ships taking food across, plus the time it took to load them, meant that it was a slow business, and there is no port on the top of the South Island. You have to go up a river to a port, which is, I believe, something like about 10 miles inland. So shipping food backwards and forwards was a very slow business, and these New Zealanders said, we could do it in freighters, couldn't we? So they bought some of these, and the airline set up out there, and they bought a dozen of them initially, I think about a dozen in total, but over the years they operated huge numbers of these. They kept borrowing them from other airlines. They discovered that if they were careful, it still took them half a day to load it, because put all the boxes inside, but it was a lot quicker than shipping by ship, because they could do at least probably one flight across, one flight back, and maybe one more flight back. But the guy in charge realised that loading boxes into this was a hell of a nuisance. It was, time consuming. And he came up with the idea of a thing that they called a cargon, and the photographs of it show that it looks exactly like a bath on wheels, except it's about 40 foot long, 8 foot wide, and 3 foot high. And they could load that outside on a lorry, which was then equipped to match the front of this aeroplane, so that it just rolled off a lorry into the aeroplane. And they actually got the turnaround time for taking one of these from stopping the engines, take this cargon out, put a new one in, start the engines. They got it down on the best ever, which they never repeated, I might add, was 8 minutes. So these aircraft were in good weather. They could do probably 8 or 9 return flights in a day. Certainly, and it totally changed this company. And they bought huge numbers of freighters. They were buying second-hand freighters anywhere they could find them. And it became a huge service. The other thing that was interesting about it is that as a result of this, the owner of this company started getting visitations from people from airlines that he'd never heard of, didn't know where they were, because New Zealand then, in those days in the 50s, didn't know much about the rest of the world. So they were getting airlines like Pan American and TWA and so on coming and saying, can we see this thing that does the instant freight carrying? they had dozens and dozens of these people came across to see them, and they were all very interested in this whole idea. And curiously, at the same time that they designed this thing, an elderly ex-Navy American designed the first 40-foot container. He bought an old ship, took everything off the surface, all the guns, everything else, plonked, and he designed these freighters. And the world started with freight, you know, the 40-foot, 8-foot by 8-foot. And if you look on the net, you can find this history of this humble guy who designed them. He never made any money out of it, as far as I can make out. But now the world has millions of freighters, freight boxes on it, all coming from one ex-US Navy guy. And in fact, the guy who set this up was an ex-RAF, Royal New Zealand Air Force pilot. I mean, this aeroplane is substantially complete. And it means just putting bits back in it, basically, and fastening the wings back on. But we can't do that in this building because this building is not big enough. In fact, if you stand here, you can see, we've got all this wooden structure around here. That was to hold the shape of the fuselage while the centre wing was missing. Didn't want any movement in it, in the structure, because this was going to come, 16,000 miles by sea to here. It's a long way. And in rough weather, this is just a very thin thing. I didn't want it getting distorted by, you know, big bumps in the sea and so on. So we put this huge structure around it inside New Zealand, which keeps and if you look up here, that's one of the bolts that holds the wing on. There's 4 of them, and that holds the wing on. But there are actually, and you can't see them because of the light, there's 3 more bolt holes that go up there as well. You can't see those with that light on. The cockpit, if you go to the cockpit then, well, we can go to 2 things here. This operates, it's a handle for operating the doors. You open and shut them with this. In order to have the aeroplane parked here with one door shut, because we can't open it in the space we've got, we had to disconnect that. You can see the chains up there. When you're winding that handle around, you can see all the chain wheels working up there. And all I can say about that is that you have to be extremely fit to do one opening or one shutting. It is hard work. It's shifting very heavy doors, and you've got to wind and wind and wind and wind and wind. It takes a long time. Access to the cockpit is this, which we put this on, because obviously people climbing up this is a total pain. You've got a camera like that. I couldn't climb up with the camera in my hand, because you let go of this, you fall off because it's vertical. So what I used to do was to go up there, and if there was somebody around, I'd go up and they'd pass the camera to me. And the cockpit, we've put this on to stop people going in there, because there is no proper floor in there. You have to climb over the instrument panel, which is in the middle. Up there, you've got to climb over it to get into the pilot's seat. And this aeroplane has no pilot's seat on the starboard side. All the mechanisms for it are there, poking up through the floor, but not used. And we believe, I'm told, and I can't confirm this, that was because they took food to an island, the name of which I can't remember, about 500 miles from New Zealand. There's a little island which is sort of nominally a sort of, I don't think legally it's owned by New Zealand, but I'm not really very certain. But it was a small island, and they used to use these to take food to it. The problem was, in those days, with the navigation skills people had in the Pacific, most people could finish up in somewhere very different. And so what they did with this aeroplane, as I understand it, was they decided to have it just as a one-man control aeroplane, and the navigator would have tables sitting next to the pilot, and he had little bits of equipment that could stick out of the aeroplane to measure wind strength and whatever, to ensure that they could find this island, because it's only a couple of miles long or something, and they took food out for the people who lived there. But if you read history, you know the number of people who thought they could fly across the Pacific and were never found, ever. You know, you can be 1,000 miles off course. People think the wind is the same, but the wind panel, the wind shapes of wind as you see them in the Pacific are different every few hundred miles. And if you set off knowing the wind is going south, by the time you've got somewhere else, it's now flying north. And of course, if you're counteracting for a south wind when it's a north wind, you can imagine how far off you get, which is why so many people died in the early days of trying to fly across. So here, one pilot was taken away, so that they had the space to put a navigator in with as much information as he could use and have to make sure that if you're going to fly to an island 500 miles away, that you're actually going to get there and not somewhere else. So the doors are winded by this big handle here. It's bloody hard work, and it takes quite a long, there's hundreds of turns of this lever, and it's hard work. Usually I think they were probably the pilots and crew then were much fitter than we are these days. But even so, when I've had tried to open them, I've usually finished up when it was shut. Every day while I was in New Zealand, I'd open them halfway, and that was enough. So, anyway, so there we are. Oh, there's one thing we've missed. While I was in New Zealand going through all the collections of junk, finding all the parts that had been taken out of the aeroplane, I came across these very rusty frames with a completely rotten pad on them. And they were just folded up inside, and I took one out to see what it was, and it suddenly dawned on me that it had two holes there and there, which a bolt goes through into a double pair of holes all the way along in the fuselage. There's another pair there, and so on, and same down there. They're parachute jumping seats. And but they were covered in this pad on the ones that we had there was completely rotten. You picked it up and it all fell to pieces in your hands, so I threw them away. But we discovered that this is the original material on it. It's got a few holes in it, but that's the wartime material, or post-war material. It's got traces of rust in, but it's all original. We had a very kind lady repaired the leather bits for us to fasten it onto these, but otherwise this part is all original, and we could see from the originals that they had bits of red paint on them, so we repainted them red. And we've got three of them, so we've got two that go that way, and one down there which has got the two bolt holes on the opposite side. But in fact, with the bolt holes, because they're on the same side, you can put this chair facing forwards, or you turn it round and plug it in on that side facing backwards. So you had all the options. Then you come to something else, and here this aeroplane has a unique feature. It's the only Bristol Freighter that ever had it. This was the door, and the door is meant for cargo. It's wide, and it's not very high. And once people started having, owners started having people coming in, a number of people banged their heads on the way in. Not very nice. And also there was a problem because they wanted to be able to try parachute jumping. The only way they could do that, this door opens forwards. It's on two simple hinges. Two men can pick the door up and walk off with it. So when they went for parachuting, two men would take the door, put it on the ground, and when they came back, they put it back on. I know you two men can do it because with another guy, I've lifted one of these doors off and put it back on, so I know it can be done. But the problem was that when you're climbing and you're flying up at an angle, anything loose on the floor slides down the floor and disappears out through this bloody great hole, which is not very helpful. So the New Zealanders sat and thought about this, and they came up with a parachute door, and this is the only parachute door in existence. They made one, and they used to swap the doors around. So if this is 5911, if 5910 came to you and said, we're parachute jumping today, they swap doors, because they're all got the same keys for all the doors, same key fits all the doors for the fleet, same hinges to fasten it on. So what they did was they made this, and this is the unique, utterly unique parachute door, the only one ever built. And they swapped them around with the aeroplanes when they wanted to use them. And while I was in New Zealand, all the owners of freighters in New Zealand, there are 4 of them there, they all came to me, can we buy the door? And they were willing to pay me quite a lot of money as well, which was surprising. And it got a bit bitter because obviously, and my view was, I had 2 views on this. Firstly, one would then be pissed off by the others who haven't got it. And secondly, I thought if it's unique, I'm going to keep it. And I just said no. And so we kept it, and here it is, and it's the only door of its kind that we know of that was ever made. And but why they wanted to do parachuting jumping, I don't know, because the likelihood of the New Zealanders ever doing real jumping, you know, in a war or something, must have been zero. But anyway, they did it. So that's it, and this is how it came to us. The freighters that we used, obviously for passengers, they had panelling inside and everything. These must have been horribly noisy inside, because all you've got here, that's just the bare, thin skin. You can tell, it's not a very stiff skin, it's very, very thin. So, I mean, if you did that on a modern aeroplane, you would get no response at all, because the skin's about 1/4 inch thick.